So, as of writing this script, Phase 2 of the Secrets of the Storm 2.0 roadmap has been out for just over 2 weeks, and I have some thoughts about it. I don't usually pride myself as someone who knows this game too deeply like some of your other Risk of Rain 2 content creators, but I have a decent amount of time in it, and I know what I like and what I don't like. Needless to say, am I the only one who felt a little off about this phase of the update? I mean, I can't really put it in a more concise way. It's not that I hated this update. I do think it brought some good things to the game, but I also just feel uncomfortable about it. I'll get into my specific thoughts in a moment, but for now, I just want to say that this is just my opinion. At the end of the day, I think the game is ultimately better than it was, but not by much. All I'm asking is that we all be civil and respectful in the comments below. I have no ill intentions with this video, just wanted to share what's been on my mind for the past few weeks. Anyways, let us begin. I'm going to move in order of parts of the update that I have the least amount of issue with to the most. Starting off, I think the Halcyon changes and Scorchworm changes are very nice. As much as I enjoyed killing the Halcyon for free by baiting it off the map, I like how its current version actually presents a decent mini-boss style challenge like it always should have been. The Scorchworm definitely feels a lot better to play against, however, I'm still of the mind that this enemy is fundamentally flawed. Enemies gaining invincibility isn't unheard of, but I still think that the Scorchworm does it in the most annoying way. It's not fun or engaging to fight against these guys. Instead, I often find myself seeing one pop up a mile away, fire a shot across the map, and then disappear the instant I get near to it. Enemies running away also isn't a new thing, but this simply isn't done well. Add on the fact that if the enemy is overloading or has shields in any way, it basically just heals back to full shield for free while underground if you don't immediately prioritize it. I just find it incredibly annoying that this one mid-level enemy takes so much attention away from all of the others just by existing. I think a decent change for this enemy would be to make it so that it can only go underground for 3 to 5 seconds maximum. This would make it much more predictable and less likely to completely reset if it had any shield. This, or make it so that it had a longer cooldown on how often it could go underground. Ultimately, I don't mind this enemy that much, but I just wish it were different. Next up we have the Void Field changes, and all I have to say is, did anybody ask for this? I know that the Void Fields were a decently strong option if you had the opportunity to go to them, but they weren't completely ruining the Eclipse meta as far as I'm aware. The Void Fog changes are the worst offender here. I want to like them and I understand why they were implemented, but they really only fell back and made it so that low mobility characters such as Captain or Engineer greatly struggle to beat it even without being greedy. Sometimes, even beelining it to the next cell vent isn't enough and you end up losing your watches or even the run. The timer changes were also pretty awkward. At most, you can expect to gain maybe 2 to 3 minutes on your timer, which in the grand scheme of things is pretty inconsequential. And finally, the enemy and enemy item changes seem pretty random. Yeah, the enemies receiving items earlier is a little harder, but if you intend to do the level in full, as most people do, it doesn't really make a difference at all. If anything, it just gives you a better idea of if you should leave earlier or not. All of these changes just felt very random and like they didn't really change that much. I think simply reverting it so that the timer ran as normal in the level would have been fine enough. The whole issue is that you could get an entire level's worth of items, including a guaranteed legendary, without increasing the difficulty timer, so I don't see the issue in making this less rewarding. I've heard an idea of removing the interactables from the stage and making it so that the only items you get are from charging the cell vents, but I think that that would just make it boring and not worth the effort. It's a decently long experience, so I don't see why adding the consistent timer back wouldn't have been enough. Okay, next up, items. I'm going to preface this with a reminder that I'm not a professional at this game, and these are just my opinions. As for the item changes I think were absolutely necessary and done well, they include the War Bonds, Growth Nectar, Warped Echo, and Breaching Fin. These items are still pretty strong, and I don't believe that this much needed nerf hit them too hard. As for the changes I'm simply confused by, were the elusive antlers really an issue? I mean, like I said, it's possible I just wasn't recognizing their strength, but I don't think they were exactly S tier. I often found myself scrapping them in favor for other, more consistent movement-wide items, as I never found them to be making a massive difference. This change that removes its base movement speed increase seems harsh and random. It's not the same severity, but imagine removing the crit chance increases from the Harvester's Scythe and Predatory Instincts. It would instantly drop them at least 2 levels on the tier list, since without other crit increasing items, they would effectively be 6 times worse without it. The antlers weren't hit as bad as this, and are still a fine item, but I just have to say that this feels unnecessary. The Bolstering Lantern has dropped from an A tier attack speed item to a C tier fluff item you hold and wait for a scrapper. It's not terrible, but it's now outclassed by the Soldier Syringe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that this item was intended to be a better alternative to the Soldier Syringe, with the trade-off being that you had to earn the buff. But now it's just worse after like 2 stacks. I feel like simply nerfing the radius by removing its ability to grow would have been fine enough, but instead we reduced its total effectiveness by 25%? That's a lot, and in my opinion, way too much. And finally, what the hell is up with the unstable transmitter? This isn't a new issue, but I've always been of the mind that this item has the worst instance of an identity crisis that I've ever seen. It started out as basically a lunar item that had a decent chance to make your situation worse by teleporting you into a more dangerous area, into an insanely overpowered item that basically gave you a free life when it was off cooldown. Now, it just feels like it's trying to do everything while barely succeeding at any of it. The barrier reduction is totally fine. I think this nerf was much needed and completely welcome. The removal of its ability to give you 1-shot protection is also welcome as well. While it is a rarity higher, its status as an objectively better power elixir was always a little strange to me, as I believe, rarity or not, that every item should fulfill its own niche without being just an objectively better version of another item. Also, and this wasn't due to the Phase 2 update, but why does this item apply bleed? Why does it do that? No, seriously, why does it do that? What value does adding 1, maybe 2 stacks of bleed onto an enemy ever do? It feels like they just couldn't decide if they wanted this to be a healing, utility, or damage item, and just kind of mashed them all together to make whatever it ended up being. I do like the enemies teleporting away mechanic, and I think that it's in a fine place, but I'll never understand why it ever needed to apply bleed. I don't even know if I think this item is over or underpowered anymore. I'm just confused by its existence. Hell, I don't even know how I'd change it. I just don't like this item. I don't get this item. If it were up to me, I would have changed it so that it just moved a rarity up. It was legendary status already, and we did it with the Breaching Fin, so why can't we do it with the Unstable Transmitter? I think it would have been totally fine to move it into the legendary status to be a very powerful defensive item. Anyways, on to our final section, and that is the False Sun boss fight changes. Overall, I do think the fight is a lot more fun, and the attacks are definitely projected a little better than they used to be. I no longer feel like I'm simply dead if I'm near him at all, as the melee attacks are no longer as devastating. That's about it though, because this fight is still pretty miserable to play. This all really boils down to one major reason: cover. They did make it so that there are more pillars in the second and third phases, but that wasn't really an issue. The issue was that these pillars were really your only option of cover. Yes, you get the False Sun's crystal attacks as cover as well, however, as far as I'm aware, it's really hard to predict when they will detonate, and if they do, you're basically dead, especially if it's the third phase. The laser attack is easier to dodge now that it's from a single location, but it is still incredibly devastating. This is because it turns your usable area of play from this to this. This wouldn't be a huge problem, but the fact that the False Sun is still able to chase you down here is ridiculous, and unfortunately, I think that these changes didn't solve anything. You better pray you have some sort of movement and a decent amount of armor, because if you ever have to leave the very little cover you have, and you will, you're basically dead. The one and most obvious solution to this is to make it so that the laser has a slightly delayed tracking. Make it just fast enough to track you while walking, but not fast enough to catch you when you're moving at full speed, much like the Xi Construct's laser. This would make it a significant threat, but it wouldn't remove the current death sentence that exists if you leave cover basically at all during the laser's duration. I'm not kidding when I say this, but another option for fixing this attack would literally to be just knock one of the pillars over. Currently, you can't move when behind the cover you're given, at least not very much. Knocking one of the pillars over would allow the player to dodge things like the stone golem's lasers and false sun without being forced to take damage from the laser. It would be a much shorter cover, and cover that stone golems could jump over, but you'd still have some room to breathe, which the current version of this fight does not allow. I'm done talking about this update now, I think. I just wanted to communicate how utterly lukewarm it all felt after giving it time to sink in. I'll also mention again that I was part of the playtesting team for this update, and I feel like some of the concerns were ignored, if only a little bit. The developers are amazing people and have done amazing work with the community after the mess that was the Seekers of the Storm original release. I'd just like to say that a lot of us were talking about the lack of cover in the fight and how you can only be so skilled at the game until it's just kind of an unavoidable death, and that just wasn't solved. I do hope this fight gets another touch-up in the next update, with just a little more cover or just better cover, or a slower laser attack, as I feel it just needs a little more work before it will be fun to play again. The rest of my complaints aren't that important and stuff that I can live with, but I believe that this cover issue is pretty serious. Anyways, that's all from me. Do let me know your thoughts about this update in the comments below, and remember to be civil and kind while you're down there. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel as they do, and thank you for listening to me yap for however long this video ends up being. Bye-bye.